chaos erupts when a judge in courtroom of Washington, D.C. calls his personal security to escort him out. But in a shocking twist, they arrest him on the spot, right there in front of everyone. Judge Harold Whitaker, a respected 65-year-old veteran of the bench, is presiding over a high-profile trial. A man who spent decades upholding the law is now the one in handcuffs, exposed as a criminal. How did this happen? What led to this jaw-dropping moment that sent shockwaves through the nation? Let's rewind and set the stage. It all started with a trial that had the country's eyes glued to their screens. A trial involving Senator Richard Caldwell, a powerful political figure accused of embezzlement. The courtroom was filled with reporters, political aides, and curious onlookers, all waiting to see how justice would unfold. Among them was Karoline Leavitt, the youngest press secretary in U.S. history, representing the White House. But what began as a routine trial quickly spiraled into a scandal that no one saw coming. A scandal that would expose a web of corruption and test the courage of those who dared to uncover the truth. Before we dive into this wild story, I'd love to hear from you. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment below and let me know. Now let's get into the details of this unbelievable courtroom drama. Karoline Leavitt, at just 28 years old, had made history as the youngest press secretary of the United States. Known for her sharp mind and unwavering determination, she was in the courtroom that day to represent the White House, taking notes on the trial of Senator Richard Caldwell. Caldwell, a 50-year-old senator with a charismatic smile and a reputation for getting what he wanted, was on trial for embezzling millions from public funds. The evidence against him seemed airtight, but whispers of corruption had been swirling around the case for weeks. Some said the senator had powerful allies, maybe even the judge himself. Sitting near Karoline was Elena Martinez, a 35-year-old investigative journalist who had spent years digging into corruption within the judiciary. Elena leaned over to Karoline just as the trial began, her voice low and urgent. "I've got something big," she whispered. "Evidence that could blow this case wide open. But I need your help to get it out there." Karoline raised an eyebrow, intrigued but cautious. She was the press secretary after all. She had to be careful about getting involved in something that could reflect on the White House. Still, her curiosity got the better of her. "What kind of evidence?" she asked. Elena's eyes gleamed. "The kind that could bring down a judge." On the bench, Judge Harold Whitaker adjusted his glasses and called the court to order. At 65, he was a towering figure in the legal world, known for his strict demeanor and no-nonsense rulings. But beneath his honorable exterior, Whitaker was hiding a dark secret. For years, he had been taking bribes to sway cases in favor of powerful figures like Senator Caldwell. The senator had paid him handsomely to ensure a favorable ruling in this trial, and Whitaker had every intention of delivering. But he didn't know that his carefully constructed world was about to come crashing down. As the trial progressed, the prosecution presented their case against Senator Caldwell. They laid out financial records, witness testimonies, and emails that painted a clear picture of guilt. The senator sat calmly, his expression unreadable, confident that Whitaker would find a way to dismiss the charges. But then, the prosecution dropped a bombshell. One of their investigators took the stand and presented a new piece of evidence, a leaked financial record showing a series of payments from Senator Caldwell to an offshore account. The account, the investigator revealed, was linked directly to Judge Harold Whitaker. A gasp rippled through the courtroom. Reporters scribbled furiously and whispers filled the air. Whitaker's face turned pale, but he quickly regained his composure, banging his gavel. "Order! Order in the court!" he shouted, his voice trembling slightly. "This is preposterous. These allegations are baseless, and I won't allow this trial to be derailed by slander." But the damage was done. The evidence was now part of the public record, and everyone in the room could sense that something big was about to happen. Karoline Leavitt, sitting in the press section, felt her heart race. She had been watching Whitaker closely, and she could see the panic in his eyes. As the youngest press secretary in history, She had a responsibility to report back to the White House, but she also had a duty to the truth. She stood up, her voice cutting through the murmurs of the courtroom. "Your Honor," she said, her tone firm, "the White House demands transparency. How do you explain these payments?" Whitaker's eyes narrowed and his face flushed with anger. He pointed a trembling finger at Karoline, his voice booming. "You're out of line, Ms. Leavitt. You're nothing but a mouthpiece for a failing administration. Sit down or I'll have you removed." Karoline didn't flinch. She squared her shoulders and fired back. "The American people deserve the truth, not your deflections." The courtroom fell silent, the tension palpable. Whitaker's fury boiled over. "You're a disgrace to this courtroom," he roared, slamming his gavel. "I won't stand for this insolence. Security, escort me out. Now, I'm under threat." The judge's security team, a group of stern-looking men in suits, began to move toward the bench. Among them was Agent Marcus Brooks, a 40-year-old FBI agent who had been working undercover for months. Brooks had been posing as part of Whitaker's security detail, waiting for the right moment to strike. He had been tipped off about the judge's corruption by Elena Martinez, who had been feeding him information for weeks. Now, as Whitaker called for his security, Brooks saw his chance. The courtroom watched in stunned silence as the security team reached the bench. But instead of escorting Whitaker out, Agent Brooks stepped forward, his expression cold and determined. "Judge Harold Whitaker," he said, his voice echoing through the room. "I'm Agent Marcus Brooks with the FBI. You're under arrest for bribery and corruption." Before Whitaker could react, Brooks snapped handcuffs around his wrists, pulling him down from the bench. The judge's face contorted in shock and rage as he was led out of the courtroom, the cameras capturing every second of his fall from grace. Karoline's hands trembled as she recorded the moment on her phone, her mind racing. Elena leaned over and slipped a USB drive into her hand. "This has everything," Elena whispered. "Recordings, documents, proof of Whitaker's deals with Caldwell and others. We need to get this out there." Karoline nodded, her resolve hardening. She knew she had to act, but she also knew she had to be careful. As press secretary, she couldn't afford to be seen as the one leaking this information. Not yet. She needed a plan. Later that day, Karoline and Elena met at a discreet location, a small diner on the outskirts of D.C. They sat in a corner booth, the USB drive between them. Karoline plugged it into her laptop, and together, they listened to the recordings. The audio was damning. Whitaker's voice, clear as day, negotiating bribes with Senator Caldwell. "You get me the money, and I'll make sure the charges disappear," Whitaker said in one recording. "I've done it before, and I'll do it again." Another file revealed a broader network of corruption, implicating other judges and political figures who had been working with Whitaker to rig the system. "This is bigger than we thought," Karoline said, her voice low. "If we don't handle this right, it could bring down more than just Whitaker and Caldwell. There's a whole ring of corruption here." Elena nodded, her expression grim. "I've been tracking this for years, but I never had enough to go public. With your position, we can make sure this gets to the right people, without it being traced back to us." Karoline hesitated. She was the press secretary. She had to protect the White House's reputation. But she also couldn't ignore the truth. "We need to get this to the FBI," she said finally, "but we have to be smart about it." While Karoline and Elena plotted their next move, Senator Caldwell wasn't sitting idle. Out on bail, he knew the evidence against Whitaker would lead back to him. He couldn't let that happen. He called in a favor, hiring a group of armed associates to track down Karoline and Elena and make sure the evidence disappeared, permanently. That evening, as Karoline and Elena left the diner, a black SUV began tailing them. Elena noticed it first, her journalist instincts kicking in. "We've got company," she said, her voice tense. Karoline glanced in the rearview mirror, her heart pounding. "Hold on," she said, flooring the gas pedal. The chase was harrowing. The SUV pursued them through the streets of D.C., its driver determined to run them off the road. Karoline swerved through traffic, narrowly avoiding collisions, while Elena clutched the USB drive tightly. "We can't let them get this," Elena shouted. Just when it seemed like they were cornered, Karoline made a sharp turn into an alley, losing the SUV in the maze of back streets. The women pulled over, catching their breath, but they knew they were running out of time. They had to get the evidence to the FBI, and fast. Meanwhile, Agent Marcus Brooks was interrogating Judge Whitaker at a federal detention center. Whitaker, still in denial, tried to play the victim. "I've been framed," he insisted, his voice dripping with false indignation. "This is a witch hunt, plain and simple." But Brooks wasn't buying it. He leaned across the table, his eyes hard. "We have the financial records, Harold. We know about the offshore account. And we know you've been working with Caldwell for years. Start talking, or you're going down alone." Whitaker sneered, but a flicker of fear crossed his face. "You want names?" he said. "I'll give you names, but I want a deal." Brooks shook his head. "No deals until we have everything. And I know you're holding back." Back in D.C., Karoline and Elena knew they couldn't wait any longer. They needed to force the issue before Caldwell's associates caught up with them. They devised a plan. Karoline would use her position as press secretary to draw public attention to the scandal, while Elena would work behind the scenes to get the evidence to the right people. The next morning, Karoline called a press conference outside the courthouse. Standing in front of a sea of reporters, she spoke with confidence, her voice steady. "The White House demands a full investigation into allegations of judicial corruption," she said. "We will not stand for any threats to our justice system, and we call on the authorities to act swiftly." The press conference was a calculated move. Karoline knew her words would put pressure on the FBI to act, and they would also send a message to Caldwell that she wasn't backing down. But she didn't expect Caldwell to show up. As Karoline finished her statement, the senator pushed through the crowd, flanked by his armed associates. His face was twisted with rage as he pointed at Karoline. "You think you can take me down?" he shouted, his voice carrying over the murmurs of the reporters. "You're playing a dangerous game, Ms. Leavitt. You have no idea who you're dealing with." The crowd gasped as Caldwell's associates stepped forward, their hands on their weapons. For a moment it looked like violence would break out right there on live television. But Agent Marcus Brooks and his team had been monitoring the press conference, anticipating trouble. They moved in swiftly, surrounding Caldwell and his men. "Senator Richard Caldwell," Brooks said, his voice calm but firm, "you're under arrest for conspiracy, bribery, and attempted intimidation." The senator struggled as he was handcuffed, shouting threats as he was led away. "This isn't over," he yelled. "You'll pay for this." As the chaos unfolded, Elena seized the moment. She had already sent the recordings from the USB drive to a trusted contact at a major news outlet, and within minutes, the audio was being broadcast across the country. The recordings were undeniable proof of Whitaker and Caldwell's corruption, and they also named other officials involved in the ring. By the end of the day, the FBI had made a dozen arrests, dismantling a network of corruption that had plagued the judiciary for years. In the weeks that followed, Judge Harold Whitaker and Senator Richard Caldwell were convicted on multiple charges. Whitaker, once a respected figure, was sentenced to 20 years in prison, his legacy in tatters. Caldwell received a similar sentence, his political career destroyed. The judiciary underwent sweeping reforms to restore public trust, with new oversight measures put in place to prevent such corruption from happening again. Karoline Leavitt, still the youngest press secretary in U.S. history, remained in her role, earning praise from the White House for her bold stance. Her actions had aligned perfectly with the administration's push for transparency, and she emerged as a hero in the eyes of the public. Elena Martinez's journalism career soared after the exposé. Her reporting on the scandal earned her a Pulitzer Prize, and she became a leading voice in the fight against corruption. Agent Marcus Brooks was honored by the FBI for his role in dismantling the corruption ring, and he was promoted to lead a new task force focused on political corruption. The nation watched as justice was served, But for Caroline and Elena, the victory was personal. They had risked everything to bring the truth to light, and they had succeeded. Caroline delivered a final statement on behalf of the White House, her voice steady as she addressed the nation. The reforms we've put in place will ensure that our judiciary remains a beacon of justice, she said. We will continue to fight for transparency and accountability at every level. In the press pool, Elena watched with a subtle smile, her notebook in hand. The two women shared a glance, a silent acknowledgement of what they had achieved together. They had exposed a scandal, brought down a corrupt network, and made history, all while staying true to their principles. And that, my friends, is the story of how a judge's hidden scandal came to light, thanks to the courage of a young press secretary, an investigative journalist, and an undercover FBI agent. It's a reminder that no one is above the law, not even those who are supposed to uphold it. What did you think of this story? Let me know in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more wild tales like this one.